Good evening, all. My name's James. Thank you so much for joining me first of all this evening. I'm really excited about tonight. It's going to be a really good session. The first thing I actually want us all to do, if we can, I'm actually going to put a very brief poll out to you, and it's going to appear on your kind of little toolbar that you've got on the left-hand side of your screen as you look at it. And I just wonder if you could possibly complete that very simple poll for me. So it just gives me a little bit of indication as to your level of experience with things like flipped learning, and just to give us a bit of sort of food for thought, really. So I'm gonna put that out to you right now. So that should be appearing for you pretty much imminently. It should already be there actually, because there's a short delay on this recording. And while you guys go about answering that question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start giving a sort of a basic introduction as to what we're going to do tonight. I promise you we will be no more than 45 minutes. That is absolutely the longest that we will go tonight. And we've got quite a discrete session. I want to leave at least sort of 15 minutes at the end for sort of question answer and getting the specific sort of responses that you guys, are looking for. So let me first of all share my screen with you. I'm going to show you a couple of specific things. And once we've done this in terms of an intro, I'll then come back and share those poll results with you. Okay, so first of all, I hope that you're seeing now the black screen of what is effectively a canvas. And what we've got here is I've just put together a very, very, very simple agenda that we are going to follow for this evening. So the first thing we are going to do, no yawning at this point, we are going to have a look at the briefest of briefest history of flipped learning, where this concept has come from. Is it really a newfangled faddish thing, or is it based on principles that really have existed for a long time? Secondly, we're going to have a look at the main assumptions behind the flipped learning model and the flipped classroom. We're going to sort of try and understand what it is that people assume that the flipped learning is, and perhaps what flipped learning actually is. So that might give you an indication of where we're going with this. Thirdly, I want to address some misconceptions that I think are pretty common with regard to flipped learning, and we'll come to those as our third part of our agenda. And finally, and certainly well within a half an hour, we're going to have a look at some notions of best practice. Okay, so that's what we're going to go through today, or this evening, I should say. What I will do ever so briefly, though, is I'm just going to come back into the webinar room, and what I'm going to say here is that in terms of the responses that you've given me, the majority of people in the session, and by the way, there's many of you that are in tonight, which is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for being here. The majority of you are saying that you're relative novices to this. There are some people who are a little bit more experienced, but the majority group are saying it's the first exposure, or you're giving it a try, you're giving it a bit of a whirl, maybe on an occasion or two. And therefore, I'll sort of tone my presentation towards that sort of consideration. Okay, so thank you very much for completing that. If you have just popped in and you don't know what I'm talking about with that poll, it appears on the left-hand side, and do feel free to add your weight to that poll. So all that being said, let us get cracking. Well, look, I'm going to talk to you ever so briefly about this history of flipped learning, Now, it's actually a relatively short thing. Let me just drag you down on the canvas, just down to here. I'm going to talk to you about four major influences. This is not meant to be exhaustive, okay? The idea of this is not to say this is all the research that's ever been done, but what it perhaps does say is these are some key things that you could, after the session, go and read or investigate, Google them, whatever works for you, and find out maybe a bit more about these stages. Certainly what I would say is a forerunner to all of this. When we talk about Mazza, for example, we're talking about pretty recent stuff, actually about 1997. But what we can say about flipped learning is that this is not a modern concept. If you get a chance tomorrow, go and have a chat with people like geography teachers, and they will say to you that they have been flipping their classroom for many, many years. And what they do in humanities, for example, is that they expect the student, and they will have done it many times in their own training development, they expect the student to read the field notes and the guide information, and then the lesson is all about discussion and use of that information. So that's certainly not a modern concept, okay? So there's no reason why we have to see flipped learning as this very newfangled faddish thing. But what we can say is that we've got these four really significant people that had an impact on flipped learning. The first one is this guy, Eric Mazza. I'm probably really bastardizing the pronunciation of his name, and I'm sorry if that's the case, if someone knows better than me, but that's how I say it. And this guy, Harvard University professor, effectively, he wrote what was a really instructive guide and it was called Peer Instruction, a User's Manual. And his main point was this, and I think this, whether you're interested in flipped learning specifically or more generally looking at reflecting on classroom practice, his main idea was that the teacher is not necessarily a deliverer. So the way I'm going to sort of summarize that is that he argued that the teacher is not necessarily, the role of the teacher is not necessarily as a deliverer in the classroom. So I would ask everybody that's out there tonight to think about the classroom you teach in most regularly. And I know there's many PE teachers in tonight, and that may well be the sports field, the gymnasium, but think about this from a sort of a theory teaching perspective. What is it that that classroom is set up for? Is it set up, is it structured, designed, built, resourced for delivery transmission? Or is it resourced for things such as group work, interaction, social interaction, creativity? And what we tend to find in the majority of classrooms is that the classroom is actually structured on the assumption that the classroom is there for the delivery of some kind of lecture. And all I'm doing here, I'm not saying you should throw that idea away, I'm just highlighting the possibility that maybe a classroom doesn't have to be at least just that. All right, the second influence we're going to talk about was a colleague called Alison King. And again, mid-90s we're talking about roughly here, Alison King. And Alison King, she actually published what was a really interesting paper. I'm not going to write it in for you because it'll take me too long and you'll get bored of watching me write it. But it was called From Sage on the Stage to Guide on the Side. From Sage on the Stage to Guide on the Side. So can you see straight away how this notion of the teacher doesn't have to be a deliverer was agreed upon largely by King in this manner. And what we're saying here is, or what King would have argued, is that the teacher, if we ask them to transmit information in the classroom, we can actually go as far to say as that is one of the most mechanistic roles that we can expect a teacher to actually do: planning, delivering, and marking. And again, if we reflect on the current state of education, what percentage would it be of all teachers' time delivering, planning, delivering, and marking? I think the number would be quite high. And Alison King challenged this idea, and she really was the one who developed the idea of active learning, which, is a pretty common term in education today, the notion of active learning. You actually learn through exposure of doing, building, arguing, debating, constructing, breaking, project work, etc., 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 rather than being a passive recipient of a transmission. Again, I would encourage you to reflect on that. I'm not necessarily telling you there's only one way. I'm encouraging you to reflect. And I never know how to pronounce these names either with our next influence. We're now into the mid-2000s. If I remember rightly, I think we're around about 2007 here for Large, Platt and Tellier. And these colleagues, they produced the first reference to inverting the classroom, which is, of course, has in the last few years become the notion of flipped classroom. And specifically, they describe this as a gateway to creating an inclusive classroom. And they specifically talked about the idea of the lecture at home, So now we can start to see where the influences are of what the role of video, for example, and recording of slides and of presentations has become very prominent and linked closely within the global notion of flipped learning. So Large, Platt and Tellier, really, they advocated and practiced the idea of lectures at home through things like video tutorials, with the development and growth of the internet made that possible. And that's where we get the idea of the video. But certainly for me personally, as an individual, the real major influence I have had on my practice is that of Salman Khan. And if you don't know Salman Khan's work at the Khan Academy, I cannot emphasize strongly enough the importance of go and have a play on that website, register yourself, register your children, enjoy taking part in those activities. And I would also recommend to you that you get yourself a copy, hopefully secondhand, and you can get it on a nice price. But I would encourage you to read Salman Khan's book, The One World Schoolhouse. It is one of the most influential things I have ever read, and I would highly recommend it to any teacher. Salman Khan is the most watched teacher on earth. He is the creator of the Khan Academy. He has delivered some billions of lessons via videos, via lectures, at home, in the class, anywhere. And really, flipped learning has been strongly related to Sal Khan, who really started making videos as a tutor to his family. Although, you know, he never planned it to become an educational tool, it certainly has become an educational tool. So we can see that these are massive influences on the concept of flipped learning. Now, they're not all of them, they're not exhaustive, they're just the ones that I wanted to highlight for you. And if you want some wider reading as a result of this session, those are some great places to go. So let's go back up to our agenda. We have ticked off history of flipped learning. What I'm going to do ever so briefly before we move on, what I am going to do is I'm going to go back into the webinar room, and just to invite you, really, if you do want to ask me a question as we go through, if you post that into the chat, I will do my very best to answer that. So, for example, if I've talked about Sal Khan, the Khan Academy, and you think, oh, what is that thing I want to know? Well, feel free to put that in there. So I guess what I'd like to get to is the nitty-gritty of the information, but there might be specific things that you want me to address, or you want me to cover, or you want me to describe, and I'll do my very best to do those as honestly and as I can within the time frame that we've got. So do feel free to ask me those things. So all that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the main assumptions behind flipped learning. If you were going to go tomorrow and say, right, as a teacher, as a department with this specific pilot class, maybe, you know, we're going to start this flipped learning process, you know, what would be the assumptions that you would be expecting there to take place that would actually invigorate you to actually make that decision? So let's get cracking with that. Let's actually look at that concept straight away. So I've put a couple of points in here. By the way, I'm going to come back to these pictures for use in a few moments' time. But what I'm going to do now is I just want to drag you down here to a couple of main assumption points that I've put in. I'm going to talk you through them. And again, by the way, you will get the recording of this. Don't feel like you have to scribble everything down all in real time. But certainly one of the things I would say is that flipped learning has an assumption at its core that the classroom is a social place. Okay, so I would ask every colleague who's in the webinar this evening, who's an attendee tonight, to reflect on your own experience of classrooms as a student, as a teacher, and how social are those places? How much interaction do we encourage? And of course, the answer to that is going to vary greatly. But what we can say is that let's just take an individual lesson. If we have set a homework which is flipped, that might be a video, it might be some reading, it might be some data tracked quizzes, you know, there's various possibilities here, then perhaps what's more possible in the classroom is to use that information, to discuss it, to debate it, to do project work, to argue it, to construct an idea, to do all those things which are in essence more social. And I'm going to make a slightly more philosophical point here, and it's this. What do we expect to happen when a group of 20, 25, 30 people enter a room? We shouldn't be surprised if they want to look at each other's eyes, if they want to engage with one another, if they want to tell stories and jokes and listen to each other. That is a very human thing to do. So perhaps flipped learning is a model by which we can actually encourage those natural behaviors to be possible within the classroom and create more learning. So my second main assumption about flipped learning is that a classroom is exactly the place where errors should be most frequent. Okay, so this may well upset a couple of people. I don't know. I mean, let's have a think about this. My point is this. Whatever the toughest experience of a course, of a GCSE and A-level, I'm sure there's more international alternatives. I'm talking about British qualifications there. If you're not in Britain, then I apologise. I don't know the qualification structures elsewhere. But where would we want the student to do their most challenging, rigorous tasks? That might be essay writing, that might be research, that might be producing an amazing piece of coursework or project work. Where do we want that to happen primarily? And my point is this, that most rigorous of experience should happen in the classroom because of this next point here, because that is where most support is available. That support comes in the form of other learners, it comes in the form of the teacher, it comes in the form of the resources that are around the room. Those resources, the people, and also the physical resources of the space, they should be there at the exact time when the student is most challenged, when they're doing that most rigorous thing. And let's all acknowledge now that being a passive student within a transmission, within a classroom, you know, someone delivering a PowerPoint, not that that's bad, but if we are passive as a student within that classroom activity, we have to, because we are being delivered material to, then we have to acknowledge that we are losing time for the most rigorous place where errors should be celebrated and should be indicators of success. I'm going to pause on that just for a second. Errors in learning are the very indicators that learning is about to happen. When students don't make any mistakes, we can actually say that there's no learning happening. We can actually say that all they've done is demonstrate something that they could already do. So my point is this: if we can take the passive part of a typical classroom, let's broadly refer to that as the lecture, just for want of a better term. The passive part is the lecture, you know, someone presenting information to you. And if we can make that at home, if we can make that repeatable, if we can make that available from anywhere, then the level of, or the accessibility and acceptance of errors, the toughest challenges in the classroom, the most challenging experiences within the learning structure can happen with the most support available in the classroom. So I'm saying, for me, this is not about technology. This is not about videos. This is not about, even though I do make a lot of videos myself, this is about fundamentally challenging the idea of what a classroom is. Okay, my sort of penultimate, excuse me, assumption about flipped learning, I think it's a really, really good one, is the idea that a classroom need not be structured for this broadcast lecture. And obviously, I've already talked about this, not be structured for a broadcast. You know, if we were to truly ask the question of why those classrooms do have the presentational area at the front, why they have those tables and chairs often in rows or similar, why it is that we have a box-shaped room that we loosely have to close the door and keep soundproof. Why? It's because a teacher is broadcasting information. That is the basic assumption that drives those structures. And I'm saying we can challenge that. I'm not saying to you reject that tomorrow. It may not work for you tomorrow because you've got to put some philosophy and thought and discussion and project work into these sort of ideas. But we can challenge these ideas at least. And finally, on the assumptions, I think the flipped learning model makes this assumption very clearly, that the classroom is everywhere. So let's go back up to these pictures. No longer do we have to accept what I believe is a very exclusive concept, that we will teach you, someone's teaching these people, presumably, someone quite frequently, presumably stands at the front of here and does some kind of teaching. Someone is a teacher over here delivering material to these people. But it is a very exclusive concept to say, I will deliver material to you at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning for 30 minutes or whatever the equivalent is. Why can't we say the delivery of my lecture to you is available every minute of every day without exception? And I think that becomes a very interesting question. All right, I'm going to pause there because I've talked for quite a long period of time. I'm just going to come back into the webinar room. And again, I'm just wondering if people have any sort of questions that you want to ask. Do genuinely ask them. Please don't be embarrassed to do so. I really would like to answer the questions that people have got. So we need someone to be brave, and we need someone to ask the first question. Unless you literally think I'm telling you all the information you could possibly know, which is, the chances of that are literally zero. So do ask questions, and I'll try my utmost to answer them. Maybe while those questions start to come in, I probably didn't say enough about why I do this at the start, or about the context I work in. Many of you know my work, I think, so you've got broadly an understanding. Certainly those of you that work in PE, you know the work that I do. I produce flipped learning videos, blended learning videos. I have an online platform which is a self-paced learning site, and that has become quite popular. So those recordings, those sorts of materials, I watch some millions of times each year, and that's a very exciting thing, and people seem to be engaging with it. So as a result of that, I've moved quite dramatically into this sort of understanding and knowledge of flipped learning, and for a period of time, I actually took quite a big decision in my last teaching job in a secondary school to flip all of my theory classes. Now, I'll come back to how practical that is in a few moments' time, but it's certainly something that you've got to really think about before you do it. I was a bit impulsive and just did it. I thought, all right, I'm doing this. Let's see what happens. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say you do it in that way. You've got to have some clear philosophy behind it. Okay, some questions coming in. So from Sam Ainsworth, how does the flip mat come into play? The flip learning mat, and I don't know, Sam, if you're asking specifically about the one that Paul at P for Learning has produced. Sorry if you're not a PE teacher, by the way. I'm sorry, we're talking about PE here, but it's general. The flip learning mat is the note-taking tool. So my personal view, I'll show you my note. My personal view is that students should make whatever notes that they feel that they should, but that should be a quality process too, and you want to interact with them over that. People have produced brilliant flip learning mats, and they're magnificent. I don't have an example of one here. I probably could show in the screen, but it'll just take me a few times to root around in my folders to find one. But if you go to P for Learning and have a look at that flip learning mat, it's a beautiful, beautiful document, and it's really engaging for young people. So that's the note-taking tool. So Sally Jones, the name of the book was The One World Schoolhouse. I cannot advocate that highly enough. By the way, I'm not on commission. I wish I did know Sal Khan. I love that man, but I don't, so I'm not on commission from him. But oh, that book, whew, that is good, and it will fundamentally challenge you in the assumptions that we all make in education. Loads of people say book things like books change this and change that. I mean, that book for me is biblical in my context, so I would really encourage you to reflect on that. James, another James. James, if you're doing the flip learning with resources available and tasks set for homework, the information gathering part is the home task. Well, that just clicked up there, apologies. So is the information gathering part is the home task. Are you focusing on the exam part in class? Yes and no, I'd say, James. The exam is the product of the education, right? The certification, the examination experience. We live in a real world where we have to develop that for young people. But for me, there's something in between, right? So the homework into exam prep, it wouldn't happen a lot with me. There would be some interim periods, and I would really encourage people to read about the Kagan structures. I've done a lot of material on my own website for teachers who are already enrolled, looking at engaging with owned and active learning that can actually engage in this. One of the things that can become challenging with flipped learning is that you can actually ultimately have learners moving at significantly different paces. That's not bad. In fact, that's beautiful. So that needs some management, but certainly I wouldn't just go flipped homework, exam papers. For me, the monotony and that would become a tedious experience. I think there's got to be a really active, engaging project, fun thing in between, and then you focus down on the exam. And I've put a lot of material into that, so I can perhaps give you some examples later, James. Thanks, James, as well, for the comment about the One World Schoolhouse. The One World Schoolhouse by Khan Sally, thank you. Darren, how do you deal with pupils who do not watch the video before the lesson? I'm glad you, oh, didn't mean to do that. So I'm glad you asked that. For me personally, I track their interaction with the resources to the click. So every time they, in fact, let me show you it. Let me just, the screen's just going to go ever so funny just for a second here. And okay, here we go. I'll show you. On my platform, and I'm not saying you should use I'm not here for sales, by the way, really, folks, I'm really not here for sales. Okay, just bear with me. Sorry about this, guy. There we go. That's gone a bit crazy, that screen. Sorry about that. So on my platform, every interaction with the software that the student uses within what's called a learning management system is tracked. So not only do you know if they've done their homework, but you know when they've done their homework, if they've repeated it, and you also know, for example, if they've mastered that homework. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the quiz activity here. So this is if it was done on quizzes at home, for example. All right, so what we could say is, right, we set a quiz for homework, and for argument's sake, the quiz was the ATP and energy quiz. Okay, and we can see which students have done that, and we can also see when they did that. We can also see what score that they got as well. So I would say that you track that. And the other screen I showed you ever so briefly, this one's a very simple one. We can see here, we can see which learners have mastered that area, so taken the lecture and mastered the quiz together. So we see here Luke Skywalker has got a gap in his knowledge, and we would want to work with Luke to find out, did he complete it? If so, what went wrong? Which bit is he struggling with? But it's razor sharp data, right? You've literally got like mastery level data. He hasn't mastered these things, and that's not just he did it, he mastered it. So I really believe in that. I'm not going to go any sort of further on to that tonight, because it would be going into a bit of a different direction, but it's certainly something I'm happy to talk to you about in a bit more detail. If we set a flipped homework of reading the book, you have that challenge, right? Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with reading the book as the homework, but how you manage the process probably becomes more challenging. The way I like to do it is have the data-centric environment, the data flowing and knowing they've done it. Not maybe, not hoping, knowing. And also the day before they come in for lesson, if someone hasn't done it, you know, whatever process you've got at your school, a call home, the texting service that you might have to students and parents. You might be, if you've got your lesson Friday morning first thing, you might be at the door of that student's classroom at the last period, end of last period on the Thursday afternoon. Get that work done tonight, and it comes in real time. So all that technology is possible. Now, I want to make a critical point here, right? I'm not making an argument for technology in education. I have literally no interest in technology in education. For those people doing computing, ICT courses, this sort of thing, absolutely, right? There's huge relevance. For me, the only relevance of technology in education is to humanize the classroom. The fact that we have that data flow means that I can be specific with how I interact and intervene with students who might be struggling. So that's what it is for me. It's a humanizing process, paradoxically, with the technology. So this is not a technological presentation. I'm not interested in the technology. I'm interested in the humanizing effect of the technology. Sam, listen, I really don't, thank you for that, by the way. I really don't want to get salesy in this. So can we, let's have a chat afterwards, Sam, okay? So let's find out a way. I'll contact you via email and we'll talk about that. I really want this to be a, that sort of process. So Paul, what is the name of the program software? The one I use, my website's mypeexam.org. I don't know if you're a PE teacher, Paul, so please excuse me for saying that. I would strongly recommend you look at khanacademy.org as well for maths and science. Is beautiful. There's lots of alternatives that are British styled as well. But really what we're starting to talk about now is the concept of blended learning. Blended learning is the concept of taking the best possible things from the classroom, the things that we all like doing, you know, interacting, group work, project work, exam questions, mark schemes, refining, essay writing, all those things, taking the best things from the classroom, taking the best things of the internet, things like self-paced lectures, online quizzes, data, and smashing them together so you have a blended environment. And I don't know if we've got senior leaders in the webinar room tonight. I believe we have actually, but one of the things that must never drive the move to flipped learning or towards blended learning is cheapness. It is actually quite a cheap model. It can be done relatively cheaply despite the technology. But that shouldn't be the driving force. The driving force should be an educational philosophy that every learner should have constant access to learning so that they can aim for mastery level learning. Anyway, I'm going to stop on that one. Tom Brush, thank you so much for that point. That's one of the things I'm going to come back to with common misconceptions. What if pupils don't have access to technology at home? This is called the digital divide. It's something you've got to be very wary of when you go down a technological route if you use that with flipped learning. So I totally agree with you on that, Tom. This is where, for me, the school policies and the protocols have to be sharp, okay? So if you're gonna blaze a trail with flipped learning or blended learning, and you have a clientele where perhaps you're going to have a significant number of students who don't have access to that sort of technology, then that is going to hamper you if you go the technological route. But let me repeat again, flipped learning is not a technological process. It can include that, but it needn't be. But I guess some of the practical aspects of it could be that you could, if for example, the internet is the issue, you could burn it onto DVD and see if that was, and find different ways of getting that technology, getting that appearance there for the student. But I agree with you that digital divide is a major issue. So I don't think we should underplay that. I think it's an absolutely critical point, Tom. By the way, Tom, it's really great to see you here as well. You're a guy I've really respected on Twitter for a long time, so it's absolutely lovely to have you here. So I'm just a little bit conscious of time, so I'm gonna go back to my black screen, and we're gonna just make some progress here. So typical misconception. By the way, we've actually addressed a couple of these already from the magnificent questions that you guys have already answered. Look at that ominous clear screen with too little structure. Let me just turn my notes page as well. So for me, some of the misconceptions that I think is really, really critical to spell out at this point. I'm going to say to you that flipped learning, which I'm going to just call FL, is not a learning model, okay? So if you think about learning models such as pedagogy, andragogy, hoitagogy, flipped learning is not a learning model. Flipped learning is what I would call a tool or a resource. So if like I did for daftly for a period of time, if you were to flip everything that you did, it would become really difficult. There'd be a heck of a lot of front end work. You would have you would have the real possibility of reaching boredom levels quite quickly, I think. So flipped learning is not a learning model, but I like to summarize it like this: that it's one step excuse me, one step on a journey to self-paced learning. Now, that is quite a bold statement, okay, and some of you will maybe be taken aback a little bit by that. All the evidence coming out about how human beings actually learn is that true, deep, intuitive learning only ever happens when it's self-paced. And that's not to say that things like tutorials and lectures can't be really significant. They can, but to really deeply, intuitively understand something, there needs to be a self-paced element to get to that level. So what we're saying is that flipped learning, therefore, can produce you a tool that maybe helps you move towards that self-paced learning model. I'll just leave that at that. I don't want to take that too much further right now, but it's an option and it's one consideration to make. The other thing I'd say about flipped learning, and this really becomes a criticism, I think, is it's still what I would call still one pace fits all. Okay, so what I'm saying here is because it's not ultimately a intrinsically self-paced model, we're still going to be in a situation where perhaps we do topic 1 in week 1, topic 2 in week 2, topic 3 in week 3, because the guide is still the teacher. Do this lecture, do this task, do these worksheets, whatever the combination is, it's still one pace fits all. So in the one pace fits all model of education, which is very prominent in Western education on this planet, but in the one pace fits all model, I should say, the greatest achievement really of the model comes about through differentiation, which I always have problems spelling, so that's a bit embarrassing. Differentiation. So the optimal achievement becomes a process of differentiation. And really what I'm suggesting here is that flipped learning can take us closer to a model such as blended or hoitagogical, sorry about that word, learning, which actually allows us to have a differentiated model, not a one pace fits all model with some differentiation added onto it, but a differentiated model in its structure. Okay, so I know I'm sort of throwing out a few baits here that people might want to think about longer term, and we can talk about that longer term. I also would say that flipped learning is not a solution. Okay, so there are no learning models, there are no devices, there are no apps, there's no websites, not even mine, that are silver bullets that are going to solve all of our problems. And flipped learning, neither is that. It's a tool for you to put in your teacher belt and to play with, to try and to perfect. Just like the brilliant questioning technique, just like the brilliant group work methodology, just like the brilliant structure you've got in your classroom. It's not the solution in itself, it's a tool that we need to apply. I am going to make the monotonous point because, we're in the idea here of misconceptions. If you do it every session with every learner, constantly in the same method, it can become monotonous. Okay, so again, use it as a tool, not a learning model. Okay, so I would really recommend that you consider that deeply. The other thing is that it can conflict with other subjects. Now, this should not be undervalue this point. If you do go down a sort of a heavily flipped learning route and your students have got the traditional model in their science, their maths, their history, geography, I'm not meaning to pick on those subjects, just in general, then of course what you're going to get is this notion of conflict. You've got to have a certain skill of taking tutorials at home. You've got to have a certain skill of being disciplined to do the reading, to read the field notes, for example, to actually benefit from this. So if those skills aren't being broadly developed across the school or educational experience, you might come up against a barrier there. And the last one, and I think this maybe is one of the most exciting things that we could say tonight, is it's not just for students. Now, I think we've got a brilliant example of that in the room tonight. You guys, okay, you're taking part in this live tonight, but you're going to get the recording of this afterwards, and you can watch it at your own pace. You can watch it at home. You can watch it when you've got that free moment, and then you can apply it in the classroom. So I really think there's a journey to go on with regard to teacher CPD. Now, teacher CPD. Now, I've put my 2 penneth worth into this by recording over now 100 tutorials for teachers in this sort of style, including this one tonight, and I'm sort of trying to contribute to that. All right, I'm going to come back into the webinar room, see if there's any other questions that people have posted. Okay. All right, I think I've got to go up a bit. Daryl Haynes says, do you find that you have to chase after many students to have them complete the lectures at home? I would say less so in this model than when they've got to do the essay, for example, or the questions. Think about it in a philosophical way. If we're taking the toughest challenge, which is writing the problem set, the essay, the exam question, and we're saying do that at home, that's the part they're going to get stuckest, that's a terrible word, they're going to get most stuck on. All right, they're going to have most problems on. That's why I'm saying bring that bit into the classroom. The more passive bit, which is the lecture, perhaps, if we're going to go in that route, that can be done at home. There's less chance of kind of failure in that because, of course, ultimately it's self-paced. So I think that you'll get a better take-up rate. I've got a brilliant, well, I'm not saying it's brilliant. I've got a blog post on mypexam.org because it's called A Little Story About John, and I'd encourage you to read that, actually. It'll give you a bit of insight into that one. Jennifer, what methods of flipped learning work best of areas with high deprivation? Well, good question. I mean, I think that's a fantastic question. I would be guessing, I think, if I present to you that I've got a clinical answer to that, I'm going to be misleading you, so I don't think I do. I would look at the movement that the Khan Academy have done, for example, called Khan Academy Light. I would have a look at that. It's actually been designed for use in parts of the world, not just in parts of the country, but parts of the world that are particularly deprived. So I think they've got some brilliant answers, and I would sort of refer you to Khan Academy Light for that sort of consideration. James Khan, how do you overcome this one pace fits all while not scarifying the POS? I'm really sorry, I'm really bad. I don't know what POS is. So you need to explain. Maybe I'm being really daft, I don't know. But I don't know what you mean by POS. Can you clarify that for me and I'll try and answer? Or are you saying the differentiation allows pupils to reach a stage in the learning where their understanding on that topic at that time, maybe a C grade, for example? This is a big topic, so I'm going to say it quickly, James. Why in education would we ever settle for aiming for anything other than mastery of concepts, skill, behavior, and knowledge, ever? I don't understand why we do that. This notion of working towards a C grade, for me, I largely reject that concept. And funny enough, once you do that and you've got a variable seat time experience within classroom, I know I'm blending into other concepts here, then you can really bring in a notion of mastery learning. I'm not saying to you every student can always get an A. That's not my argument. But what I am saying is that in topic one, whatever topic one is, you can ensure, because there's variability of access, there's repetition, there's real-time data, there's really razor sharp intervention. You can make sure that all students master topic one and then topic two. And lots of people therefore argue, well, you'll run out of time. Actually, blended learning models, which we're now touching on, the data coming out of those always shows the same thing, that you do initially get this slow progress at the start of the blended learning structure, while the super learners, one of the better terms, fly off into the distance. But it shows time and time again that these ones, once they develop skills, knowledge, and particularly confidence, they catch up and often overtake. So I'd encourage you, again, Khan Academy got some great research on that. And by the way, on differentiation, I'm not criticizing differentiation. If you are good at differentiation, you are top of the pops teacher for me. But what I'm saying is you're doing that in spite of the system, not because of the system. And I think that's a problem we need to address in education. Sarah Green, IT problem has occurred. This often happens in the classroom. My webinar has just started from the beginning again. How can I forward to where I was? I don't know how to answer that one for you, Sarah. So I'm really sorry. I don't even know when you're going to get to see this answer. So I don't know the answer to that one. I'm sorry. James, program of study. So I'm going to go back. Yeah, I was being daft, wasn't I? How do you overcome this one pace fits all while not scarifying the program of study? I would just ask what a program of study is. I know what it is, but my point is that, you know, who has decided that students get limited access to things like lectures, content, experience, quizzes, worksheets, papers, questions, mark schemes? Why does that have to be limited to what the program of study says? Why can't they go forward and back as often as they need to suit the individual? And that's really one of the main points that I would present to you. What do you use to create online quizzes? I use learning management software. So for me, Google Classroom doesn't cut it for me personally. So I use a piece of software called LearnDash, which you've got quite a few steps towards getting to that point. Certainly things like Socrative and Nearpod I know is very popular. I'm not advocating any of these, by the way. I personally don't use them. Things like Google Forms, yeah, they're okay, but you've got to do a lot of tweaking with the wording and how the data comes in, and so on. And sacrificing. Thank you for highlighting that for me, James. But anyway, come back to your point, Paul. It was the software I use is called LearnDash. It's called an LMS, a learning management system. So it's more than just quizzes. It's also the data tracking as well. All right, I am going to finish on time tonight, so I'm determined, absolutely determined to do that for everyone. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go back to our agenda, just remind you of what we are going to finish off with. I want to talk to you here about the notion of best practice. Now, look, these are just going to be my opinions, okay? Others will have different ones. I can only give you what I believe myself. So I'm going to give you a series of points which I think are best practice considerations, or things that maybe, let's actually put it in terms of next steps. Okay, let's put it into that sort of context. By the way, I know my handwriting's dodgy. You don't need to tell me. So today, look, this is the first thing I think that all attendees should do as a result of this session. Number one, stop and think and reflect. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to just let these ideas sit in your mind. Some of them you'll agree with me on, some of them you'll think that guy's a lunatic. That's fine, but give yourself the time and space to reflect. It's one of the things I think in education we do very, very poorly in our structures, in our systems. Teaching is one of the most frenetic experiences imaginable, and I would encourage all of you to try and give yourself some time. I'd also encourage you to actually discuss this with other people. When you get the recording, show them it and share it with them. Other things that I would like to say about best practice, and these might seem like very trivial things, but I think that they're really important. What happens when we start something new? We make mistakes. So when you do this, expect the first session to be a bit ropey, and the second one only slightly better. Maybe the third, the fourth, the fifth, you'll start to perfect it. Expect errors when you roll this sort of process out, if you are going to do that. And of course, those mistakes, they sharpen our processes, they sharpen our protocols, they sharpen our decision making. The other one, and it's a fairly obvious one that I would say, is why not try and lead a pilot? Okay, so this is not to say that you dramatically change the offer of what you're doing in the school, but why don't you just look at one group? Maybe one group that is less engaged, maybe one group that things don't seem to go that well with. Why not try something different? Lead it with a pilot study. Maybe you do it for 6 weeks, see what happens. And in that 6 weeks, you might flip the classroom 3 times and 3 times not. Give it a go, see what happens with that group, and take the learning that comes out of it. If you learn with what comes out of it, it's been a valuable experience. Now then, if you are going to lead the pilot, you might be thinking about resources. If you are thinking about a recording, say a video, I'm not saying it has to be video, just be aware someone else has already done it. Now, I'm not saying that means that you have to use theirs, but just have a little look, because there's a heck of a lot. I mean, if you're a mathematician, the stuff that Colin Hegarty's done, or if you're a scientist, the stuff that Sal Khan's done, PE, for me, there's loads of other stuff as well that people have put out there that you can latch onto. I've said already, recognize that flipped learning is one step on a journey to self-paced learning. I want to repeat that here, because for me, that's very important. And remember as well that all deep intuitive learning is self-paced. Okay, so if we make that leap to accept that notion that all deep intuitive learning is self-paced, we have to be prepared to apply that to children, to student learners. And I've just asked the question. I'm not saying I have the answer. What proportion of a child's experience in British education system today is paced by them, the child, the student, the learner, the owner of the qualification, the people that ultimately has to live with those grades? I know we do as teachers as well. Believe me, I know. But are they the one that's pacing the progress? Are they the one that's owning the experience? Are they the one that's going through those processes? And if they're not, maybe we can change things. And I just want to make one last point. I haven't really left myself much space, but tech in education, and this is really important, must humanize the classroom. Okay, so if tech in education can restrict the need for this sitting in rows experience, passive, listening to the teacher at the front, fingers on lips, sometimes can be a bit antagonistic when it's not done very well. If we can use technology to limit the need for this sort of experience, this more passive element in the classroom, and make a much more engaging activity in the classroom, such as group work, using the material, project work, questions, interactions, one-to-ones, if we can make the classroom more about that, then we are using technology, if that's the version we use, and it doesn't have to be to humanize the classroom. All right, so I'm just going to come back into the webinar room, and I'll do my very, very utmost to answer all of your questions. So let me have a little look at this. Paul Dunn, thank you. Excellent CPU session. Paul, honestly, mate, I love doing this. I don't know how I've stumbled upon this, but I am in my element, honestly. But thank you for joining. I love doing it. I think we've got a community of people. I'm proud that we come together. Sadly, it has to be a Wednesday night in our own time, but we come together, we talk about these things, we agree, we disagree, we find solutions. I think it's beautiful. So honestly, pleasure's mine, really. Paul Gallagher, thought-provoking session, plenty to take and digest. Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And I'll send you the recording as well, and I'll send you some materials to back that up as well. Jonathan Bailey, thank you for tonight. My PPT done. It never stops, Jonathan. There's always room for more. Jonathan Bailey, need to now go away and reflect, plus catch the voice. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do the same, so I completely agree. Jonathan, another question. You're on fire here, mate. Sorry, quick question. Have you seen this used in primary? I've got to be careful how much I give away here. What can I say? You're about to see that, okay? And yeah, is the answer. And I'm actually directly involved with some process. Maybe if we talk about that question again in a year's time, we're going to have one heck of a conversation, because there's movement in that direction. What we must never ever aim for is more screen time for children. This is why the humanization but is really important with the technology. This is not about giving kids more screen time. I already think that they've got too much. If anything, the screen time that we do use, if we use that model, should be used to engage the parents. You know, think about that primary level. Think about, for example, having flipped learning for parents. Think about guiding parents of, say, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds to, for example, how to coach a young person to improve their SAT score. To, for example, look at the notion of what is the role of errors in the learning process. If we can get that model out, oh man, I mean, we could be on to something really, really powerful. So yeah, watch this space on that one, because we're gonna really move on that one. Tom Brush, lovely stuff. Thanks. Honestly, Tom, I'm really delighted you were here tonight. Thank you so much for giving us time. I know you're a busy man, so thank you. Katie Hill, thanks. My pleasure. Sally Jones, thanks. James, another great session. I know, Sally, we've done a bit of work together in the past, and we've got an ongoing relationship as well. So brilliant to have you in here. Jennifer Jennings, will the video be available to share further? Yes. Once you've got the copy of the video, and I will be emailing it round, excuse me, it takes me about half an hour to render it, and I'd like to put it onto Vimeo, which I just find a better platform than YouTube for what I do, at least. I've used YouTube a lot, but I'll send it around from there. Distribute it as widely as you can, so it'd be great if this gets some resonance beyond this room tonight. Paul Gallagher, in current school, I'm finding it hard to engage them as they are so used to passive learning, so changing their mentality is my first challenge, and it is a P class. Paul, I'm with you, honestly. I really agree with you. I would really encourage you to go and read that blog post on my website called A Little Story About John. Have a look, because it talks about exactly this concept. And I'd really encourage you to have a little look at that. Jonathan, I'm sorry if I'm being cryptic. Look, I'll put it this way for you, John. My children are in primary school now, and let's just say I'm not a satisfied parent. I want to make changes. It's nothing to do with flipped learning, by the way, not directly at least, but it is to do with getting quality access and opportunity to really high quality resources, teaching, lectures, all of that stuff available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's where I'm driving from with that. So you can probably feel, so I'm sorry if I'm being a bit cryptic. I desperately want to tell you, but letting that cat out of the bag is a little bit of a tricky one. Yeah, good. My pleasure, James. Absolutely my pleasure. Elaine, great to see you, by the way. I haven't heard back from your head teacher yet, so remind them that they've got to respond. But thanks, James. You have inspired me with this love. Oh, thank you. And I know you're signed up for the mypexam.org. I don't want to get into encouraging people to use that. It's there. Contact me about that if you're interested. But I don't want this to be a sales session about that. But it's there if people are interested, and I'll talk to you about that at another time in a lot of detail. And yeah, Elaine, you're a really valued colleague. So keep talk to me, keep in touch, and let's go from there. Simon, great stuff. Thanks, and thanks for the whole My P exam package. No problem, mate. Yeah, look, I mean, you can thank me, but it's me that needs to thank you, because if people don't use it, it literally is nothing, right? So I'm really proud of it. I believe in it. I've had to step out of education in terms of classroom delivery at the moment because to build this thing, but I'm going back, and I can't wait to go back and to literally revolutionize things. And that's partly a flipped learning concept, but it's much more about the learning model, blended learning, hoitagogy. If you've never read about hoitagogy, I'd really encourage you to read, to go about that. Hoitagogy, I will spell that for you. It's a crazy spelling. Hoitagogy. Go and do some reading on hoitagogy, which I've just posted into the chat there. I'd really encourage you to read that. I find that sort of, there's relatively little information, but it fundamentally challenges so many of the assumptions we make in classrooms. Daryl, how long ago did you start doing this? About 4 years ago for me, Daryl. It was very scatty, basically. I mean, there's still like the original videos I made. They're on a white screen, made with my little fat finger end on an iPad screen. iPads were even pretty new then as well, and the videos were terrible. But I made them for this guy, a student of mine. He was doing an AS resit from an A2 course. And how can I describe the circumstances? His dad wasn't a very nice man. And this young man struggled to get into classes, struggled to get into college. So I started making videos for him in that scenario, and it sort of went from there. We hosted them on YouTube, and people started watching them, and it sort of just went from there. So what we mustn't do with sort of like flipped learning or blended learning, for example, is say, right, we've all got to make videos, and yours have got to be different to mine, and mine, everyone's got to have their own. That's just crazy. We've got to have systems whereby we get the best teaching possible. And I'm just one of the first people to do it. I'm not the best at it. We've got to get the best teaching possible available to all young people, despite that digital divide, which I appreciate Tom mentioned earlier. So yeah, about 4 years, and I've recorded now about 1,200 video tutorials in PE and teaching and some various other things as well, and in primary education. Yeah, and Daryl, what positive effects have you seen? I think probably the primary one is going from a fixed seat time model to a variable seat time model. Gives a lot of confidence to young people, so that if they get stuck on something, if they don't understand the concept, rather than being embarrassed, say, sir, on this, I don't know, and can you go through it with me, which many students aren't brave enough to do, they've always got the opportunity to go back. And also those students who are ready can also go forward. And this is a lot of people say, oh, we don't want lectures on videos. And I understand that, right? But let me tell you what a student can never, ever do when we're up at the front. And I love being at the front. You probably tell from what I'm doing tonight. But what they can never do is pause us and drag us back. They can't do that. Neither can they play us again 7 months after we delivered content to them. So those advantages structurally are major advantages. So we might lose some kind of notion of we like being at the front and delivering those things. And I'm not saying you abandon that, by the way, but just do it in like razor sharp ways in small group context. But what we gain is a variable seat time. So for me, confidence dramatically improves in learners. Think about the difference between, think about the ratio of times you say in your classroom, be quiet or listen to me, those sort of messages. 2, for example, these are the resources you need to succeed. What's the ratio between those things? In a transmission classroom, you have to say, be quiet, be silent, listen to me, sit down, sit still, over and over again. Some studies have showed that 6 times more common than any other message. Probably different in your classrooms, but it's very common. Compared to these are the resources you need to succeed. Which one of those should have a greater presence in the classroom? And I say it's the latter. When I judge my teaching, I literally judge my teaching by that ratio. How many times do I say be quiet, which is a method of social control, and I want that to be as low as possible? And how many times do I say things like, these are the resources you need to succeed? Specifically, this is where you need to be to get that mastery. For me, that's how I judge my teaching. So I'd encourage you to reflect on it. It's just a personal thing for me. I'm not saying it's brilliant. Mark Lloyd, thanks for this. Very keen to share with my department, discuss ways forward. Good man. Yeah, and come back to me. Talk to me about it. If there's things that we can do, let's talk about it. Thanks for doing this session. Great CPD. Christine, thank you so much for that. As I said, I love doing it. And Jonathan, thanks again. Keep me informed. Brilliant. Look, I said I was going to finish in time. It's 24 minutes past. People need to go and be with their families, so I am going to stop. I will be on Twitter. My Twitter handle. Let me just put it in the bar for you. I've already done it wrong. At 9PE. All right, so my Twitter handle's now on the chat. If you want to contact me on Twitter, I will be on there pretty much immediately. Although I've got to have my dinner, but you know, come and have a chat with me, and I'll try my best. And the recording will come out. So I will wish you a pleasant evening and have a lovely day tomorrow. And I genuinely appreciate you being here. Take care.